Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story, we welcome back HoboSam21, author of Hell's Ranch and A Cabin in the Snow. And as ever, please do let me know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid crew. And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story. Entitled Marco Polo, Part 1. Let's get straight into that. The blaring of an alarm clock jerked Mark's stump awake. Groaning with exhaustion, Mark slowly sat up. He slammed the offending piece of technology into submission. The sun had yet to rise and there was an icy chill in the air. Mark lived on the family goat farm with his mother Susan. Mark could remember when the farmhouse had been filled to the max, but with his older brother moved out, his father and younger brother deceased, it was just him and his mother. Together, they raised and sold goats for the meat and recently began delving into cheese making. And for the past month, Mark had not been sleeping fully. The events of what was supposed to have been a fun day away with the family and friends had plagued his nightmares. On top of that, he and his mother had been having a run of extremely bad luck. 2 ewes had died in the night without obvious cause, and there was constant electrical issues both around the buildings and the vehicles. No matter how careful he was, tools and other objects were forever being misplaced. Mark was exhausted and frustrated. Life seemed determined to kick him while he was down. Yawning one last time, Mark made his way up to the upstairs bathroom. Despite the age of the house, his father's military pension meant they always had enough money to keep the place up to date. Then, after a quick breakfast, Mark put his rubber boots on and made his way to the large red barn that housed the goats during the night. Sliding open the main door, Mark immediately noticed that the door leading from the pen of the young Weathers to the pasture outside was open. Damn it, cursed Mark. He was certain he had closed the door before heading inside last night. And rushing to the pen, he could see hoofprints in the fresh snow leading away from the barn. This puzzled Mark as goats don't care for snow, and it was then that he saw the canine prints. Mark felt a cold panic creep up inside of him. Had the beast from the woods found him? And taking a deep breath, he exhaled slowly. A closer examination showed the prints to be much too small to have been created by one of those monsters, and anger overpowered the fear. Mark stomped over to where he kept his quad. The tracks were still clear, but the snow forecasted all week. He doubted that it would remain so for long. And starting the Grizzly 660, he drove out of the barn and to the house. His mother Susan was waiting on the front porch as he pulled up. "What's wrong?" she asked before he even had a chance to dismount. "Our dog got in the barn last night. Chased the Weathers out." Susan shook her head. "Wasn't the door locked?" Mark kicked at a chunk of icy snow before replying. "I could have sworn I closed it up. I even double-checked." "Well, what's your plan?" "This losing goats business is going to get expensive soon. Could you grab my rifle? I'm going after them. There's fresh tracks in the snow, and if I hurry, I can probably have them home before lunch." And Susan nodded. "Okay, but be careful. Which rifle do you want? A 30-30 or a 22? She asked. "Best get a 30-30. If it's a wild dog, I might have to put it down." And Mark would have preferred his father's 308, but he knew that was illogical fear speaking. The prints were that of a medium-sized dog at most. Still, the thought of entering the woods filled Mark with trepidation. And the Stump family had lived on this land for 3 generations. His grandfather had bought the original 200 acres after his time serving in the Pacific, and then his father another 500 before his passing. And Susan returned with the lever-action rifle. "You be careful," she said. "Do you have your cell phone on you?" Mark pulled his smartphone from his pocket. "Yep, I'll be back by noon," he assured her. Mounting a quad, Mark sped off in the direction the tracks had led, and even with the snow falling lightly, Mark had no trouble following the hoofprints. Keeping a steady pace, he soon entered the woodlands. Now a few miles from home, he slowed. Puzzled, he stopped the quad and took a closer look at the tracks. They were tightly bunched, like the goats were being herded, not chased. Mark's thoughts went to the rustlers. Who steals goats in this day and age? He asked out loud. Rustlers or a trained cattle dog on the loose, either way he needed to retrieve their animals, and Mark continued his pursuit. After another hour of driving, he abruptly stopped. 6 sets of goat tracks led off in 6 different directions. Mark also noticed the lack of dog prints. Scratching at his head, Mark climbed off the quad. He heard the bleating of a distressed goat just ahead. And trudging as quickly as he could through the knee-deep drifts, Mark approached a thicket of brambles. Pushing his way through the thorny bushes, Mark could make out a black and white pelt just ahead. Forcing his way deeper into the brush, Mark felt his feet drop out from underneath him. Thorns tore at his face and clothes as he slid down the steep embankment. Flailing his arms about, Mark began to tumble head over heels. His descent finally ended with a splash as he landed in a small creek. Cursing and swearing, Mark jumped to his feet. Shivering, Mark looked up at the incline he had just fallen down. At the top was a black trash bag caught in the thorns. Wet and thoroughly pissed off, Mark slowly climbed his way back up the hill. And upon reaching the top, he returned to the quad. He had no intention of continuing his search in negative temperatures while wet. Reaching to start the vehicle, Mark saw the key. It was missing. Confused, he patted his pockets. He had no recollection of removing the key. He would have to get a ride back to the house. The family only had a single quad, but they did have a couple of horses. Putting his hand in his pocket, Mark felt around. His cell phone was gone. Damn it! Mark yelled in frustration. I must have fallen out of my pocket when I slid down the hill. Mark said out loud. He walked to the edge and peered down. The snow was multiple feet deep and churned up from his fall. And stomping back to the quad, Mark ripped the plastic cover from the steering column. Removing the ignition and attached wires, he began to test different ones. And finally, by twisting the red and the black wires together and touched the brown to it, he got the quad started. Sighing in relief, he hopped onto the seat and turned towards home. Less than 100 yards from where he had started, a snow-laden branch snapped off and fell, hitting Mark on the head. He tumbled off the bike, shaking his head to clear the cobwebs. Mark looked up to see his quad speeding off into the distance. Scrambling to his feet, he gave pursuit. It wasn't long before the quad hit a tree and then flipped over. Rolling it back onto its wheels, Mark attempted to start it once again. And try as he might, it just wouldn't turn over. Tracing the wire, he soon found the problem. The battery was gone. Suspicion was starting to creep its way past the frustration. Looking around, Mark couldn't see more than a dozen yards in any direction. His wet clothes were already freezing solid, and he could barely feel his toes. Mark reached into his pocket to pull up the compass app on his phone when he remembered that it too was gone. A shiver of fear accompanied the shiver of cold. It has to be getting close to noon, Mark thought. Mum will send someone after me when I don't return. I just have to stay near the quad and wait for a rescue, thought Mark. Huddling with his back to the still warm engine, Mark pulled as much snow as he could to find onto himself in an attempt to stay warm. And despite his chattering teeth, Mark felt himself drift into a fitful sleep. Mark jerked awake. His knees ached with a maddening pain. He tried to flex his toes, but his feet had lost all feeling, and he realized that if he didn't get up and start moving, he was going to die. Gasping in pain as his stiff frozen joints popped into motion, Mark then stood. The quad had long since gone cold. The sun was setting, and the shadows were long. Snow was still falling steadily, having filled in Mark's quad tracks sometime in the afternoon, and unsure of which way to go, Mark heard a sound. Listening intently, It floated by again. It was a voice. Too faint to make out what it was saying, but it was a voice calling out, like someone would do when searching. "Over here!" Mark gasped out, barely louder than a whisper. He took one stumbling step after another, hands buried deep in his armpits. The snow was waist deep and had a thick frozen crust, but Mark continued pushing his way through. Even though each step was a battle, Mark was intent on winning the war. His mother had suffered enough loss, and he would make it home. It was with this thought in his head that Mark heard the metallic clank. A second later, he felt the white-hot searing pain in his skin. Mark screamed out in agony. He dug furiously through the snow, revealing a large, rusty bear trap. It had a firm grip on his right leg. A large amount of blood began to ooze through his jeans. With a sob, Mark clawed at the trap with his frozen fingertips. He desperately pried at the jaws. Regardless of his attempts, they remained firm. Mark slowed his breathing. He could feel his consciousness fading. He then found one of the release levers. Even with his full weight on it, the trap never loosened. Mark tried twisting so he could use one hand on each release. He forced his body to turn. The jaws tearing his calf muscles and causing more blood to pour over the frozen blood already staining its jeans and boot. And just as he was about to reach the lever, the trap shifted, tightening its grip. Mark screamed again as his shin bone shattered under the strain. His face covered in frozen tears, Mark lost his fight and felt blackness overwhelm him. And as his eyes closed, he quietly whispered, "I'm sorry, Mama. I tried my best." Marco Polo Part 2. Let's get straight into that. My name is Scott Wellington. I'm sitting on the porch of my log cabin, looking out over the Utah ranch that I've been calling home for this past 5 years, when the call came in. Caller ID read Sheriff Bruce Wells. "Well, how's it going, Bruce?" I asked cheerfully, and Bruce sighed. Not so good. I got a call from Susan. She's worried about Mark. Seems he's been gone longer than expected. I'll head over right away, but I'm on the far side of the reservation. Do you think you could drop by?" Susan Stump was my neighbor. She and her son Mark raised goats on the ranch next to mine. Even with all the snow we'd had recently, in the last couple of days, I could be at her place in under 30 minutes. "Yeah, I'll head right over," I informed him. Hanging up, I headed back into the cabin. I stopped just long enough to grab some gloves and the keys to my loaner vehicle. Unfortunately, my pickup was in the shop waiting for a new engine. All the dealership had to offer for a loaner was a Blazer or a Volt, and so I was stuck with a crappy crossover for the next couple of weeks. The turbo 4-banger spun into life, and I sped down the icy gravel roads towards the Stump family ranch. Soon, I was pulling up to a large 2-story ranch house. I stepped out of the glorified car and made my way to the door. Before I made it to the first step, the front door swung open with a bang, and Susan rushed out. "Scott, thank God you're here." I quickly ascended the steps. I gave her a quick hug. "What happened?" I asked. Susan wiped a tear from her eye before replying. "It's probably nothing. Some stray dog chased off the goats last night. Mark took the quad to go after them. He said he would be back by noon, but he's still out there." By now it was nearly 3 in the afternoon. "I tried tracking his phone, but it keeps saying it's in the barn, even though I know he has it with him," she added. Susan looked strung out. She was visibly stressed. Not that I blamed her. 7 short years ago, her youngest son Luke had vanished into the wilderness that I now owned, never to be seen again. Mark had another brother, Matthew. "I'll give him a call when I check out the barn," I thought to myself. To Susan, I said, "Why don't you go inside? I'm going to go look around the barn and give Matt a call." And Susan simply nodded before turning to the house, and she warned me. "Something isn't right, Scott. I don't know how to explain it, but something bad is lurking around." I just gave her a nod. I could feel it myself. The air had an unwelcoming presence to it. Entering the barn, I felt that nagging feeling of being watched. It prickled the hairs on the back of my neck, and I froze as soft footsteps sounded on the hayloft above me. The ladder was to my left, and careful not to make a sound, I slowly ascended the ladder, one rung at a time. Peeking over the top, I was met with a pair of yellow eyes. I jerked back involuntarily, losing my grip on the ladder, and I landed flat on my back, my head bouncing painfully off the hard, dead floor. All the air was forced out of my lungs. The yellow eyes peered over the loft's edge, down at me, and then let out a questionably blatant noise. "Damn goats," I gasped. Rolling over, I did my best to regain my composure. I stayed on my hands and knees until I got my breath back. Returning to the ladder, I climbed it quickly. In the loft were 5 young goats sleepily laying about. Climbing back down the ladder, I started to return to the house when I heard a cell phone ring up. Looking around, I spotted a glow on the far side of the barn. I hurried over and brushed away some loose straw. And picking up the small iPhone, I answered it. "Hello? Mark?" asked a confused female voice. "No, it's Scott," I replied. The voice that I now recognized as Susan sighed. And after a moment of silence, I spoke again. "I think I found the goats. I'll head over to the house." Susan replied with a simple, "Okay," and then hung up. On my way to the house, I called Matt. He answered on the first ring. "Hey, Scott, you at my mom's place?" "Yeah. How did you know?" I asked. "Bruce called me. We just loaded a pair of snowmobiles and are on our way over. Shouldn't be more than 40 minutes, he told me." "Awesome. See you soon." And I hung up and pocketed my phone. Entering the house, I spotted Susan sitting next to the wood stove in a rocking chair. She had a vacant look in her eyes. She was just 10 years older than myself, but the time had not been gentle on her. While continuing her far-off stare, she asked me, "Why does this keep happening?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But let's keep our hopes up. Matt and Bruce will be here soon, and we'll find him." And she slowly shook her head. "He never recovered Jack's body. Did you know that? Nor Luke's." And Jack was Susan's husband. I didn't know much about him, just that he had died overseas while she was pregnant with Luke. Her father-in-law, Darren, was the closest thing the 3 boys had to a father growing up. He had succumbed to old age a couple of years before my arrival into the area. "There's something unwelcome here," she continued. "It started not long after you and Matthew killed the beast roaming Hell's Ranch. It wasn't much at first. Missing items, stuff breaking, things being moved to inconvenient places." At this point, I wasn't sure if she was talking to me or herself. I decided to just let her get it out. And Susan continued. "Thoughts of leaving crossed my mind, but this was Jack's home and the boys loved it here. When Matthew moved to town, it got worse. I would wake with lots of scratches on my legs, bruises on my arms. The tractor, I would never start." And she paused. Still, I ignored all the signs. Something changed in Mark after his trip. He would wake up screaming in the night. I asked him about it, but he played it off. And she paused again, this time for nearly a minute. "Now he's missing, like so many others," she finally said. It was clear her spirit was breaking. I took her hand in mine. It was ice cold. We stayed that way, holding hands in silence until I heard the rumble of a vehicle coming up the driveway. And glancing at my watch, I saw it was close to 2 minutes shy of 4 o'clock. The sun would be setting in an hour. I rushed outside to see Matt's battered 2-door Cherokee slide to a stop. Before it was fully stopped, he got out of the door. "Any news?" he asked. And I shook my head. "Where's Bruce?" Matt pointed a thumb over his shoulder. Back a ways. He couldn't keep up." The passenger door on the Jeep opened, and my girlfriend Laura stepped out. "That's because you were driving like a maniac," she said. "We were lucky we made it here in one piece." And giving me a quick peck on the cheek, she asked, "How's Susan holding up?" And I shook my head. "I'm not sure, but not good." And Laura nodded. She looked fearfully at the growing shadows that were encompassing the woods. "I hate this," she said. Then, rushing past me, she went to check on Susan. 7 years prior, Laura's husband Randy had joined a search party to look for Susan's youngest, Luke. Randy died that night. She didn't like to talk about it, and I'm sure this was a painful reminder. Bruce pulled up next, and his sheriff's department issued white F-150, pulling 2 snowmobiles. He wasn't alone. With him were 2 Native American men, Charles O'Ray and his grandson, Yellowknife. I had dealt with Charles before. He was an ordinary jackass at the time. I had heard he quit drinking and was a very different man these days. His grandson, Yellowknife, was known across the state as an incredible chucker. And Bruce greeted us, and they got straight to business. "Since Mark is a adult and only been gone for 4 hours, he's not technically missing. That being said, search and rescue is on their way. We won't get a chopper until the morning, and I highly doubt the dogs will be here before dark. My suggestion is that we get a head start while we have light." Matt obviously agreed, as he already had a snowmobile started. Gun in the engine, he launched the sled off the back of the trailer. Yellowknife jumped onto the seat behind him as Matt sped past us. Bruce, Charles, and myself watched as they flew towards the woods, throttle wide open. And Bruce, hands on hips, shook his head. "Damn kid doesn't even have a walkie. Bruce, why don't you take the other sled? I'll take the Jeep and see how far I can get." And Bruce agreed. "Who are you riding with?" he asked Charles. And Charles looked between us. Shrugging, he said simply, "Jeep warm." Well, that was good enough for Bruce. After handing out handheld radios, he fired up the Romania snowmobile and sped off in the direction Matt had taken. Me and Charles loaded into the Cherokee, and in less serious circumstances I would find the sentence. A Ute climbed into a Cherokee. Quite humorous. Soon we were following the faint quad tracks, and before long we caught up to the 2 snowmobiles. A tree had fallen across our path. Yellowknife had found a trail and continued on the far side. Before Charles and I had a chance to catch up, he and Matt were trudging quickly through the thigh-high snow. And standing next to Bruce, I asked, "Did those 2 ever slow down?" And Bruce opened his mouth to reply, but was cut off by a loud crack. We all jumped as a huge tree landed behind the Jeep, essentially blocking us in. "Seriously?" I exclaimed. I took a step in that direction, but Charles put a hand on my chest. "Wait," he said. We stood still as he bent low and plucked a sharp stick from the ground. Closer inspection reverted to be an 8-inch nail. "Oh, that would have hurt to step on," I commented. Charles looked up at the foliage above us, and he muttered something too quiet for me to pick up. "What's that?" I asked, and he shook his head. "We need to keep up with the boys," was all he said. I climbed over the large fallen tree, followed closely by Charles. Bruce was much slower. "I'm too old for this shit," he said as he slid off the trunk. The quad trail was nearly gone now. Snow still fell steadily. I don't know how Yellowknife was tracking it, but I trusted his skill set, since all we had to do was follow their fresh footsteps. We soon caught up. They were studying a snow-covered log. Yellowknife looked up as we approached. "It makes no sense, grandfather," he said before pointing to the log. "The tracks go to the log, and they continue after the log. They even appear to go over, but see?" He pressed down on the log and peeled off a piece of bark effortlessly. Well, he was right there. Even I could see 2 tire tracks going up to and over the log, and then disappearing into the brambles. Shouldn't those be flattened?" I asked, pointing to the bushes that the tracks led through. Yellowknife jumped over the log, drawing near to the thorny brambles. He nodded. "Without doubt, no ATV came this way." Now Bruce took off his stocking cap and scratched his nearly bald head. "What the hell have we been following for the past hour?" he asked. Charles was slowly backing away. "It will be wise to exit these woods before dark," he suggested. "No," said Matt sternly. "I will not leave without Mark." Yellowknife placed a hand on Matt's shoulder. "I too will remain. Only a coward leaves a friend behind," and Charles' eyes burned with anger. "Mind what you said, boy," You know not what you are dealing with." It was Bruce who asked, "Do you, Charles? Do you know what's going on here? Because if you do, and you withhold information, I will lock your ass up." Matt strode past us and got into Charles' face. "If Mark gets hurt and you could have prevented it, you won't have to worry about jail because you won't make it back." I had a feeling if Matt decided to take out Charles, there would be very little we could do to stop him. Matt had always been athletic, but in the past few years he'd gone from being a fit teenager to a built young man. He stood a good 4 inches over my 5'10" and weighed north of 230 pounds. "I think you best speak up, grandfather," said Yellowknife. Defeated Charles sat on a log we had recently crossed. "It matters not, for I fear we are too late to flee." He crossed his legs, something no man in his 70s had any business doing. "You no doubt believe you know what I am. Native I am, but not the Ute you believe. Any of the elders could tell you my lineage is not that of the rest of our people. My ancestors are what you call the Toltec people." Yellowknife looked shocked. "How can this be?" he asked. Charles held up his hand. "The tale is long and time short. Do not question me until I am finished. As I said, my people were the Toltec, a roving people who found sustenance through raiding and stealing rather than growing and hunting. The white man thought we never came this far north, but we did much more than raid Utah. My ancestors traveled as far as modern-day Canada. Unfortunately, this would prove to be their undoing. With each successful conquest, they became more daring, more crueler. While far north, many canoes flipped while navigating calm waters. Much treasure was lost along with most of the party's food. The leading brave was an exceptionally cruel man. When he heard reports of laughter coming from the woods, he sent his best hunters after it. They returned with what was thought to be children, but turned out to be particularly small people. Most notably, instead of noses, they had small bumps with no nostrils. "The Managishi," I whispered. Charles silenced me with a glare. As I was saying, these were not ordinary people. The brave in his wrath attempted to drown one of them. No matter how long he held it under the river, the little man simply looked up at him with disdain. Drawing his knife, the now enraged brave thrust it through the creature's heart. The other captured ones cried out in horror. It was then that a group of Cree burst from the woodline, begging him not to harm the Managishi. The brave whose pride was stung commanded to his warriors to kill the Cree, to kill every man, woman, and child in this land. The slaughter lasted many days before the Toltec warriors were driven south. This looked to be the end, but as the Toltec braves began the long journey to their homeland, they were plagued with trouble, missing tools, braves dying in their sleep. So many were lost to bodies of water that it took no time for them to realize the Managishi were hounding them. Their numbers dwindled as they flew south, and upon reaching the land of the Ute, only the leading brave remained. He was discovered at death's door by a wandering squaw, and she brought him to her people, and he was nursed to health. And for many years he lived among the Utes, taking a wife and raising children, but the Managishi were never far off. First, his 2 eldest sons drowned in a shallow pool. Soon after, the tribe was riddled with unexplainable deaths. The brave had no choice but to confess his previous actions to the Ute elders. Rather than throw him out, they gave him the means to fend off the Managishi. Through magic, they gave him many abilities. For many decades, the tribe was left in peace. But the character of the brave had never truly changed, and as his power grew, so did his greed. He delved into black magic, and he became so powerful, all in the land feared him. And with the coming of the white man, he was driven to the rocks by their weapons. While they could not kill him, they could cause mortal injuries, injuries that he feared the Managishi would exploit. And he remained in the land known as Hell's Ranch for countless generations. Charles grew silent before looking me in the eyes. Too bad someone decided to let the water people return. A feeling of annoyance rose up in me. This information would have been really helpful a few years ago, But before I could reply, Matt asked something that I hadn't considered. Why are they coming after my family if it's you people that pissed them off? Charles went quiet for a moment before answering. You likely don't remember much of your father. Well, he was a mighty warrior and a good man. The tainted brave would often steal young women from the tribe and attack those who entered his land. When your father was not over in that hellhole across the ocean, or he would volunteer at the tribal center. As fate would have it, one night the brave entered the village in search of his latest victim. That same night, your father stayed late, acting as a referee for a basketball game. When the screams rang out, he dashed outside. Many tried to stop him, to convince him to hide like we all did in those days, but he was incapable of such action. He battled that demonic creature with no more than a large knife, and for so many years the cursed brave had gone unchallenged. He was caught by surprise and soon fled the village, leaving his victim behind. Our chieftains and greatest magic men blessed him and the knife he used, but his anger was stoked against us. He demanded we look out for our own kind, and our shame knew no limit. We had become so complacent as to let our daughters be stolen. That very night we formed a group of men who would patrol the streets at night. The brave never entered our village again. I believe the Manigishi's desire for revenge covers even those who help the ones they hate. The Utes helped the brave, and your father helped them. And now the curse is on not only your family, but all of those here as well. Matt shook his head in disgust. He stomped off into the woods. Yellowknife looked back at his grandfather, betrayal clear in his eyes before chasing after Matt. And Bruce sighed. I wish you could have told me this a long time ago, Charles. He too walked in the direction Matt took, and I stood there in silence with Charles for a while. Me and him had never gotten along. Seeing the old man so broken, I couldn't help but feel sympathy. No doubt carrying this knowledge was one of the things that pushed him to drinking. My sympathy for him didn't change my view. Yes, my actions had ruined his way of life, but in doing so, I had saved countless other lives. And without doubt, that hellish creature roaming the land had to be stopped. I just prayed stopping it wasn't going to cost Mark his life. Wow. Certainly another one. Wow. What an intriguing start to this brand new story from our good friend HoboSam21, author of Hell's Ranch and The Cabin in the Snow. Love how you're tying in the Native American lore with this one, Sam. It's always refreshing to hear different cryptids and legends, all masterfully woven into a horrific canvas that we know you so well for. As ever, I hope you enjoyed my rendition and look forward to any more updates in the future. Well, guys and girls as ever, you know the drill. Please do let me know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid Crew. Now if you think you got the minerals or would just like to have a crack at things like myself, then please do get in touch with me at the contact email, which is as on screen. contactthedeadone@gmail.com. I really look forward to hearing from you. I hope you all had a fantastic week at school or work, or perhaps you're studying. Whatever it is that you do, I hope you're getting stuck in and you're trying to keep fit and focused. But above all, guys, remember, be safe, not sorry.